You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Marc Matthews.
Hello, folks. In this episode, I am very excited to welcome my guest today, Grammy-nominated recording engineer and mixer and creator of host of Progression's success in Progression's Success in the Music Industry podcast, Travis Ference. Hello, Travis. How are you? And thank you for joining me today.
What's up, Mark? I'm stoked to hang today. This will be fun.
Yeah, man, I'm excited for this one. I'm always excited, more than usual, to get other podcasters on the podcast. I love getting other podcasters on because it's quite interesting, and the chats we have before and after are really good as well.
Yeah,
and straight away, I get tongue-tied with my introduction there with your podcast name, straight away. And we're just discussing that off air about getting the intros wrong or slightly messing them up, but hey-ho. So I'm just going to read through your bio here for the audience listening in case they're not aware of you. So based out of Los Angeles, much more glamorous than where I am. His work can be heard on multiple #1 albums and numerous gold and platinum records. Some of his credits include Taylor Swift, Imagine Dragons, and Ariana Grande. That's quite a list. He's also the creator and host of Progression's Success in the Music Industry podcast, get it right this time, and his YouTube channel dedicated to equipping music professionals with the tools and mindsets they need to build their careers. And we were just discussing off air what you've been doing with your YouTube channel of late, and it's quite exciting stuff with the quality of your videos you're putting together, man. Yeah, really, really good.
Thanks.
Again, we were discussing off air that YouTube is a tough nut to crack and can be quite a cruel mistress, for want of a better way of putting it, as we well know. So in this episode, we're focusing on defining success and staying focused in the music industry. So my first question is about balancing professional and personal life. So as a Grammy-nominated engineer and also a parent as well, can you maybe talk about how you manage your workflow and productivity? What tips do you have for other music producers or music professionals who are trying to balance their professional and personal lives, especially with someone like yourself? And I know there are countless out there listeners with kids or similar commitments.
Totally. Well, let me give you give listeners a 2-second rundown of my career. I'm 40, so I'm getting old. But I came to LA 18 years ago, came up in Capitol Studios, traditional studio, working all the time, working overnight, phone rings, go straight to the studio. Left there, worked for a producer, same thing. It was long days all the time, 6 days a week. Never knew it was going to go on. Ended up going back to Capitol to work as a staff engineer, continuing the 60, 80-hour weeks that I think you need to do in the beginning because it's where you learn your skills. And you learn what you like to do and what you don't like to do. And then, eventually your priorities change a little bit. I met my wife. I now have a 2-year-old, and I have managed to find this way to don't tell anybody, but I work 3 days a week.
Whoa, nice.
And in those 3 days I do mixes and do the podcast like you mentioned. So yeah, it's probably one of the hardest things outside of being a parent. Learning how to balance your time in the music industry is probably one of the hardest things you can do because we all love it. I'd sit here for 18 hours and mix until I physically hurt and my wife and kid are beating the door down, but that's not, that's not how I want to live my life every day. So if you want you want tips, I don't know if there's really tips to give you about how to balance, but I was thinking about it. And the first thing that is going to be really hard to stomach for a lot of people is to set boundaries with your clients. And there comes a time in your life where you can get away with that. When you're 18, 22, straight out of school, if you did school or whatever, you want to work all the time. You don't have responsibilities to family or children or anything like that. And so, yeah, you can get out of bed at 11 p.m. when somebody calls you and go to the studio. But that eventually, you probably don't want that to be the way you function.
Yeah.
So I found with the birth of my daughter, if anybody wants to learn how to balance their time, I suggest having a child.
Yes, I can imagine.
It's like immediately. Do you have you don't have a kid, do you?
No, not at present.
Okay.
I imagine at some point that probably will change. Yep.
But it is like an immediate mindset shift of like, okay, how can I balance all these things that I love? Because now you have this extra responsibility that is like crazy hard. Anybody that's a parent knows how hard it is, but it's amazing. So, I was scared when we were expecting my daughter because I was going to take a paternity leave the same way my wife was going to take a maternity leave. We were both, working for ourselves. So we chose not to work for like 6 weeks. And I was like, that's it. That's going to be the end of my career. Nobody's going to call me. And everybody that reached out while I was on paternity leave, I just sent an email and said, hey, I'm not working right now. I just had a kid, taking 6 weeks. I can do this on X date. And nobody walked. And that was the first time where I was like, when people want to work with you, if you're clear with the boundaries you would like to have, they will respect them. Because ultimately, you need those boundaries to be your best self. Like if you want the best mix I can give you, or you want me to be the best in a recording session, to a certain extent, we need to respect what I need to do that, or what you need to do that. So boundaries is a tough one for people to stomach, but it is possible to set boundaries with clients. So that's one, I guess you'd call it a tip.
Yeah, I'll go with that, yeah.
And then another one that has really changed the way I do my business is to understand your time. And this one's super nerdy. So if you're not super nerdy, I think you should still do this. But if you're super nerdy, you're going to be into it. Just like track how long it takes you to do things for 3-6 months. I mean, I do it every day. Whatever I'm doing, I'm running a timer. And you learn how long it takes you to master a song, how long it takes you to mix a song. I have a spreadsheet where I can like spit out an average. Like I know on average, it's going to take me 6 hours to finish a song. Sometimes it takes 14, sometimes it takes 1. But if I block out 6 hours in my calendar, I'm probably going to be done or very close. And by doing that, by understanding how long it takes you to do a job, you can take more work, deliver on that work, and I completely lost my train of thought. But you can take more work, you can deliver on that work, and be accountable to yourself and make time for yourself. I know how many mixes I can do in a week, and I don't overfill my week. And that the clients don't know why they're getting what you told them they could have, but that leads to delivering for people. So that's my reason you should track your time. It also helps you understand how much you should get paid if you understand how long something takes. So, but it's challenging, very, very tough, very tough.
Yeah, 2 great answers there. And what you said right at the end of the second one with regards to tracking, I was going to mention that about if you know how long it takes to do something, then when it comes to setting your rates, it gives you a good indicator of what you should be charging, particularly if you're going to be doing it per project. Yeah. Then you know exactly not exactly, but you've got a rough idea of what you need to be charging for a mix, for a master, or a production, whatever it is you may be. So you've got 2 things there. You've got boundaries, which I think are incredibly important, and tracking as well. And tracking in particular, I do that a lot. I do it outside of music as well. I mean, tracking finances, tracking time. If you've got a particular goal, if you're going to run a marathon or something like that, I'm tracking all the time. Yeah. At one point, it got a bit overwhelming, and I had to dial it back a bit in terms of what I was doing, because I was just like, oh man, this tracking business is like a part-time job for me now. So I had to wind it back a bit. But what you mentioned there about boundaries and with your clients. So you mentioned about how you took that 6-week paternity, and you had the clients sticking around because you were clear, open and honest, basically.
Yeah.
When you're setting boundaries with the clients, any clients in particular, are there any red flags that you look for right at the beginning of that sort of client, for one of a better way of putting it, acquisition process?
I wouldn't really call any of them red flags, but you do find that everybody wants everything immediately until you ask them what their deadline is. And that's really kind of how I judge whether somebody actually has a deadline. If I'm like, what's your upload deadline? And if they say that their upload deadline is their release day, I already know that they're probably not great at releasing their music because they're releasing stuff on the same day and not getting into the pipeline. Or they say they don't know, and then I'm like, okay, so then if you don't have a release date, you don't have a upload date, why do I need to do this tomorrow? I mean, I don't say that, but you can kind of get to the bottom with that question of like, what's your upload deadline or what's your mastering date? And that will always kind of widen that window, because then that person, that client, they have to think about themselves and be like, oh, well, I don't have a release date, so I guess I can wait 3 weeks if I want to work with you, But yeah, if they do have a deadline, I do find that a lot of people reach out with that deadline. And if you're an artist and you're listening, that is so helpful to quote service provider, is if you say, hey, I would love to have you master my record. I need it on this day. And then I can just look at it and be like, honestly, no, but maybe hit up this guy or this person. And so that's kind of the only red flag, is when somebody is making up a deadline for no reason.
Yeah, I'd roll with that. And I've experienced something similar. And every now and again, I'll get a phone call from somebody. And I've had it a few times. I think I had one last month, actually, where an individual rang me and they said they wanted to record vocals pretty much in a couple hours' time. And they gave me I know. And they gave me an exact, I think it was a couple hours, it might have been 2 or 3 hours. And they gave me an exact rundown. They're like, it'll take an hour. And I want to record vocals, and I think they also said, but I need you to provide the backing track. I was just like, okay, so I know exactly, and I was just like, right, I don't think this is going to work. But yeah, so I know exactly what you mean. So with deadlines and timings and whatnot. So yeah, excellent stuff. What you said right back at the beginning, I'm circling back right now. So you said you spent 60 to 80 hours a week. You did your time, basically, for want of a better way of putting it, again, in the studio environment, to learn what you do and don't like. Was that, I mean, trying to phrase this properly here, perfectly, but what was it that you didn't like during that period of being in the industry, of being in a recording studio environment?
Well, I think the way I phrased that isn't exactly what I meant. I meant that, like, when you're first starting out, you should take every gig you can get your hands on. Because you never know where your path is going to lead. Like, you might think that you want to record rock bands, and then you take a gig working for a film composer, and then you're like, holy shit, film music is really fun. Hopefully I can swear on your podcast.
Yeah, that's fine, man.
And then if you hadn't taken that gig that was outside of your realm, then you would never have known that you ultimately wanted to be an engineer or mixer for a composer. So I think when you're early on, you should take everything, because you need to experience it. Because you think, you go through an audio program or a music school, or you take an online course. However you ended up in music, you think you're going to do a specific thing, but you really were just given a bunch of tools that you can then take to your career and decide how you want to use them. And so I think it's really important to experience a lot of things. It's like back to having a kid. Like, when my daughter gets older, if she wants to try softball and soccer, like, I want her to try all the things that she can try to see where those interests are. And I think the beginning of your career is a lot like that too. You need to try everything to see what you really are passionate about. So yeah, that's what I meant.
No, perfect. Can you remember, did you try something and you were like, you know what, sod that, I never want to do that again?
I did a lot of songwriting sessions for pop, hip hop, the pop genres, R&B, hip hop, anything that's like, vocal over a track. Yeah. And I was very fast at Pro Tools, and I really enjoyed doing it. I was really good at it. But eventually I just hit the point where I was like, I'm not interested in recording vocals anymore. And that was like a saturation point. But I did realize that, like, I don't enjoy this the way I used to enjoy it. I mean, I was able to basically swipe through Instagram while doing like a vocal session, and I was probably faster than 90% of people while I wasn't even paying attention. And it's a horrible thing to say, but like that's when I knew that recording vocals every day was just not exciting to me anymore, because I was half checked out still doing the job. But so you have to be aware of those things in your career, because you can get stuck doing something, definitely on these paths. You can go down, you can be making money and having a career and getting credits, but then like if you take a step back and reflect at what you're doing, it might not be what you want to be doing.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think time will quickly pass by as well. And then before, not to say you're going to run out of time, but we all do eventually, getting quite dark with the podcast here. But time does pass quickly. And before you know it, you've missed those opportunities, most definitely.
Yeah.
So moving on to my next topic, which is defining success in the music industry, to get away from that darker sidestep I was going down. Success in the music industry can mean different things to different people. For some, it's winning awards, while for others, it's simply enjoying the process of making music, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about how you define success for yourself and how that definition evolved over your career?
My current definition is to just do what I want to do. It's been a long road to have freedom, right? That's kind of where I'm at. Like if I don't want to work for a week and I want to go off with my family, I want to be able to do that. And we all know that that's really hard as a freelancer in this industry because the roller coaster is real. Like you can make the most money you've ever made in 1 month, and then the following month basically make zero. And so that's my definition of success, is to be able to take time out of my day to do a podcast, to do my own podcast, to hang out with my daughter, and not be putting off client work. And when I sit down to do the client work, I'm excited about it. It's music I love to work on. It gets 150%. That like half-ass swiping through your phone, like I don't want that in my life at all. Every project I work on, I want that to be just the most fun I can have with that moment. And so, yeah, my definition of success right now is freedom to do what I want. And that's not very music related, but I think that's probably a goal that a lot of people have. Yeah. And sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't, right?
Yeah. I think it's a perfect goal, mate. And it's something I strive for as well. And I think you just need to enjoy what you do,
Yeah.
You enjoy what you do. And I think it goes back to what you said right at the beginning there about having the 3-day work week as well. Because I suppose it could be quite easy to just think, oh, I could take on another 2 days worth of work and have more money come in and blah, 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 and do all that. But actually, it depends on how much you value your time and where you want to spread that time as well, and how you want to invest that time.
Totally.
And if you're doing those 3 days as well, you've sort of got that honed in. You know exactly what you can do in that time. And then when those 3 days come around again, you're going to be really excited to take on those projects, like you said, and you're going to give it that 100+%. So,
well, there's
totally with you on that.
There's I jotted this down, make sure I remember Parkinson's Law. Are you familiar with Parkinson's Law?
I'm not. No, go ahead.
Okay, so this would have been the third tip that I forgot about in the beginning. We talked about time management. So Parkinson's Law is, and I believe I have it correct, is that the work will expand to fill the allotted time.
Yeah.
And so when we had my daughter, and still, I dad 3 days a week and I work 3 days a week. That's what I do. And that's why I work 3 days a week. And then my wife does that because we both work for ourselves. We have that freedom. We're fortunate for that. But she takes a nap. So I know I've got like an hour to 2 hours on my dad day, right? And so I started to realize, like, if I come out here with no distractions, come out to the studio, it's in my backyard, and just have the baby monitor on and know that I have an hour to 2 hours, I can get a crazy amount of work done.
Yeah.
Because I've defined the limits of that work. And I don't think and I'm not doing worse work. It's just a more focused work. And when you have those time restrictions, like having a child who's young that needs a lot of attention, you realize how much you can do in 4 hours. Yeah. And so I think when you don't time block, or you don't respect your time, and you don't understand how long things take, they'll go on forever. If I don't give an end time or an end date to a mix for 20 hours, I'll do it for 4 days. And so, yeah, that should have been in the beginning.
I was going to say, it's a very good one. And what you said right at the end, again, I was going to mention about mixing and deadlines for mixing, because you're exactly right. And I have this discussion frequently on the podcast, and when I do producer Kickstart episodes and whatnot as well, with regards to mixing and mix iterations and the amount of mix versions that producers and artists, mix engineers are doing, purely because they haven't set a deadline, or they don't really know how long it should be taking because they haven't tracked it, right? Which goes back to what you said earlier.
No expectations.
And, yeah, 100%. And you'll just continue on indefinitely. Then you get to the point of diminishing returns, and then it becomes a bit of a soul suck in that respect. So, yeah,
Totally.
that 100% makes sense. And you are right. I mean, if you give yourself sort of like 3 or 4 hours and think, right, or 3 hours, let's say, I need to do a static mix for this, got to get it done. Then I'm going to move on to the mixing process, however long that may take for you, because you've tracked it and you know how long it should take. Set that deadline and then move on. So it makes perfect sense. It really does. And it's a great tip to circle back to that original question with, yeah.
Well, I was going to say there's another thing I found in these like short bursts of time that I had to work is that I can get a mix done. Let me rephrase that. I can get a mix approved faster by doing these short bursts, because every time you sit down, I'm not going to be done with the song in that hour and a half that my daughter's napping, but I'm going to do that 4 or 5 times during the week. And all of a sudden, every time I sat down, fresh perspective, full focus.
Yeah.
And I find that, we're getting mix 2, mix 3 approved instead of mix 5, mix 6 by the client. So the thing that I've kind of adjusted in my work scheduling is I don't give people a mix date. I give them a mix week. And so I work on something, 2 or 3 songs throughout the whole week, bouncing back and forth. And so I'm always kind of fresh and self-revising. And so they get that mix on Saturday night, or sometimes I'll email and be like, I really want to listen to this on Monday morning. Sorry, it'll come in like, noon Pacific time. And it's a much better starting point than crushing something for 18 hours, because your ears get tired.
Yeah.
Yeah,
most definitely.
Yeah.
And it's just 18 hours. I find that I get to about hour 3 or 4 and I'm just like, I just lose objectivity. And then,
Totally.
And then I'm like, I need to take a break. But I think once you get beyond that, you can just get lost in the weeds and of the mix. And then it goes back to what I said earlier and what you mentioned there about diminishing returns. And then, yeah, it all makes perfect sense. And I think it's a key point for the listeners of the podcast, because that idea of revisions, and I see people telling me they've done like 20 revisions. I'm like, I don't know, what are you doing at this point? Like,
I've been there.
Yeah. It's that classic. Is that vocal? I'm gonna bring it up by 0.5 of a dB in this particular bit. You're like, well, no one's really gonna notice that. But yeah.
It's such a fine, like, let's be honest. So the first like hour you spend on a mix, or hour and a half, that is like everything that happens in that first hour, assuming you're well prepared and you can just sit down and work. That's what the listener's going to hear, are those broad strokes. And, and then the next couple hours, the only people that are going to hear that are going to be you and the producer and the artist, the people that are like really dialed in. And then those hours after that, you're almost just satisfying yourself with shit that nobody's going to hear, or, satisfying the artist who wants to hear the vocal up at 0.3 dB, which we all know nobody like it. No, you can't hear 0.3. Okay, like
I know.
We're not going to hear it.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same. So yeah, I mean, it's that beginning where like the broads, that's what the person, the human consumer is going to hear is the big moves. So going on for 18 hours is trouble.
Yeah. That is a fantastic soundbite for the episode, what you said there about the first hour beat. Those broad strokes are what the audience are going to be listening to, probably on their mobile phone as well,
That's what my mom hears.
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, it sounds good. I'm like, okay, cool. I just started. My mom does not come to the studio, but, that's what she would hear if she came in.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's a fantastic soundbite and clip for the episode. So I'll make a note of that, because I really like that. With the interest of time, I think we'll move on to the sort of final question here.
Yeah.
It's sort of deviating a bit from what we were just discussing, but it's all about sort of comparison and supporting each other within the audio industry. And I think what we're doing as podcasts, yourself being a podcast host as well, is pivotal to this. So it's obviously highly competitive, and it's easy to fall in the trap of comparing. I've got oneself into my notes, so I never say that, oneself. Comparing yourself to others. I don't know what's going on with there. Can you tell our audience how to stay focused on your journey and avoid peer jealousy, and in particular, sort of that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes back to the earlier question where you're talking about success, right? So like when I started in this industry, it was a kind of a different era, which makes me feel particularly old. But like I thought that I would be a runner in a studio. I'd become an assistant. I'd become an engineer. A producer would pluck me out. I would work for that producer. Then I'd be a mixer. Then I'd mix hits. And I would do that all by like 25, right? So then when you have this like really specific mold of success that's kind of being defined by maybe your idols or your peers or people that are like just ahead of you, and you don't hit those metrics, it's really defeating. And I found that all through my 20s, despite the fact that, you know, I was working on big records, I was working with big artists, I was always dissatisfied and I was always jealous. Like if my friend was the engineer on something cool and I was the assistant on something cool, I was pissed that I was the assistant on something cool and he was the engineer on something cool. And that's not the way it should be, because all of that negativity is coming from the fact that you are not willing to define what your own success is. Like it wasn't enough. What I was doing wasn't fulfilling what I thought I should be doing, and so I was disappointed. And so I think that's where this comparison thing, which is even like escalated to another level with social media, you know,
Most
and
definitely.
It's just like everybody has a great gig. Like, you know, I worked on Taylor Swift's Red re-record. I did 5 songs on that. I don't work with her anymore. I don't have, like, I'm not going to make a record like that next year. You know, like that. So the thing that people put out there and like really like will hold as their, look what I did. That's like one of their moments. It's not what their whole life is like. So to compare yourself to, you know, a friend or an idol and be like, well, shit, like everything they do is awesome. They also have gigs that they don't like. Everybody has gigs they don't like. It's just that social media, you put that like perfect version of yourself out there. So I think that makes it even worse for people, that especially people who have grown up with social media. But we should all be supporting each other. Like if your friends are getting a gig and it's a cool gig, like, fuck yeah. Like support them, tell them how cool it sounds, you know, assuming they did a good job. Don't lie to people, you know. And that's another thing, is like having a group of like honest peers where you can be like, there's something wrong with this mix. Can you help me out? And like, if your friends are just yes people, that's not going to be helpful to you. You know, you need like, let's push each other. Everybody should be pushing to get better. 'Cause the people that you're like coming up in this industry with, like the local bands that you're recording or the smaller artists you're mastering for or whatever, those people are going to grow. You're going to grow with them and everybody's going to come up together. So being jealous and comparing yourself and getting frustrated it's just not worth it. I don't think I answered the question. No, that's my rant.
No, it's all good stuff. And I've said this a few times on the podcast with regards to social media, and it echoes what you said there about you're only really seeing what people, it's that positive element, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, that you're only seeing what's gone well. You're not seeing all the grunt work and everything else that it's kind of like a duck, isn't it? You got the legs under the water going crazy. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see my hands making like these duck leg movements underneath, trying to put all this together. I think it makes sense.
It's good. It's a good visual. I like it.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that. And yeah, with social media, you are only seeing what they're seeing. And again, with that supportive element, what you mentioned there about supporting each other, even if that individual is working in the same remit as you, so they're another mix engineer, mastering engineer doing the exact same music of you, it's not to see them as competition, it's to see them as a peer and champion that peer. Because I think, what's the phrase, it's rising tide raises all boats or something along those lines.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I'm full of them today. So it's something like that. But that's it in essence, isn't it? You're like, if you sort of, like you mentioned there, you're raising together. So it's important, because I had this conversation on another podcast a few weeks ago about the imposter syndrome and the comparison and stuff. And I wish I could go back in time now and tell them to listen to this episode, but obviously I can't. That'd be great. But no, it's fantastic advice. And again, something that the listeners are going to take a lot from. So, Travis, I think this is a good opportunity now for you maybe to give the audience listening a bit of a run through about the service you provide, and also a bit about your podcast as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a mixing engineer. I do some engineering, but really I'm a mixer now. It fits into into my lifestyle, like we talked about. And then I do a podcast called Progression Success in the Music Industry. It's got some technical tips. You know, I'm come from an engineering background, so it gets nerdy, but really it's about career growth, creativity. Like, I want it to be a broad palette, I guess, to help people build what they want, because that's what I found in my career is that I wasn't given the tools to create the career I wanted. Like I kind of touched on, I was just assuming I would be on this path and like I would do the thing. Your career's not going to be like that. And so I want to give people the tools to define their own success, to build the career they want, whether that's making hit records or just paying the bills or just recording bands on the weekend for fun. So it's called Progression Success in the Music Industry. It's on all the podcast platforms. It's on YouTube. YouTube.com @Progressionspod would be the place I would prefer you to go. Social media is @Progressionspod on everything. My personal engineering is @TFerence. I'm not going to spell it, but it'll be maybe in the show notes. And shout out to Marc for doing a podcast. For anybody that's listening that doesn't know how hard a podcast is, man, it is hard. And so, so Marc and he's going to come on my show in a couple weeks.
Yes, looking forward to it.
I don't know when that'll be out. Maybe I don't know when this is coming out, but maybe come over and you can get an intro to my show listening to your friend Marc, because we're going to have a good hangover there too. So
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a good chat. As I mentioned right at the beginning, having another podcaster on the show, we can sort of bounce off each other, because you start podcasts with this idea of generating content and creating content and sharing your knowledge and helping people. And then you realize, shit, there's a lot of work that goes into putting out a podcast on a weekly basis.
It's a lot. It's a
lot. Thankfully, AI is helping remove some of those time sucks that you get from creating a podcast, but it is worth it in the long run. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of fucking work, for what a better way of putting it. But it's worth it.
And the problem is it ends up to be a lot of fun, and you're like, well, I'm not going to stop. I need to figure out how to like make this work, because I love doing it. I love doing the interviews and meeting people. Like, that's the thing, is it's like growing your music community without the intention of begging people to work with you. You know, like, that's kind of one of the problems with networking, is people are like, hi, my name is Travis. Well, can I mix your record? Well, no, that's stupid. It's like, it's about networking is about having friends in the music industry, and sometimes they're going to cycle work back to you. Sometimes they're not, but you have friends that are on the journey, you know?
Yeah, definitely. So. And I've noticed that it's individuals that I spoke to right at the beginning, and it's only a couple of years later, then they're like, actually, Marc, can you do X, Y, Z? Or, you know, or they reach out again, or they say, oh, I found this individual through this person and whatnot. And also I find with a podcast in particular, you can reach out to people who you may never have been able to have a conversation with prior. And I've had this with the podcast before, like when I've had certain guests on, and I would have reached out to them in the past without having a podcast and thinking, oh, what do I say to start this conversation? But it's kind of a nice way to as you say, to network, get to know people and build a rapport. And you can just talk shit, as I'm doing right now, on a podcast episode, and then people listen to it and they enjoy it, which is great. But going back to what you said earlier with your links and whatnot, so this is a very long way of me saying this, they will be in the episode description for the audience to go and listen to your podcast, and also find out more about what you do as well. So that will be in the episode description. And I am looking forward to coming on your podcast as well. So that'll be another great one and a great listen for the audience as well. So head over to Travis's podcast and look out for that episode, which will be dropping at some point. Travis, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. It's great to have you on the podcast. We'll do it again sometime. It's always, as I say, it's great having other podcasters and engineers and whatnot on the show. So
we gotta the audience support each other and hang out. It's fun. It's fun. We've all been on the same adventure, so it's cool.
Exactly. And also, if you get another podcaster on the show, you're almost guaranteed they're going to have a good microphone as well, which is always good when it comes to editing, you know? So that always helps. I've had some shockers in the past. I'm not going to name names, but it is a good help. Travis, I'm well aware you're a very busy guy, so I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch up with you soon.